Hello, hello. My name is April Malone with Yes, I Work From Home. This is the podcast. Today I have Christine Reed with us. She is an author, explorer, and a freelancer. Christine, why don't you take it away and introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Christine Reed, author of the memoir Alone in Wonderland, which is about my through hike on the Wonderland Trail. So I sort of got into this working from home, working for myself place, starting with long distance backpacking. And now I live part-time in a van while I travel on book tour and continue to hike and go on adventures.
So we met at the TinyFest. Renee Sievers was the lady who lives out of the bus and hosts
Mhm.
the TinyFest. And as we were like getting escorted out, no, as it was getting shut down, I got to chat with Christine for just a second on our way out the door. I think it was starting to rain, right?
That sounds right. Yes, rain in Phoenix. Oh, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, like the one weekend that we had rain was the TinyFest. But it was really fun meeting you and seeing people. We took a trip for 3 weeks in May and June last year, in a van, with 5 of us, and we did not live in it.
Wow.
So, would you say you're in the van about 50% of the time, more or less?
Last year it was about 50% of the time. This year I think it's going to be more. And previous to last year, I had lived full time in a van for 3 years. So I've sort of done every iteration in three very different vans over the last 5 years.
Oh, really? Bigger,
Yeah.
smaller? Because what are you in right now?
I'm in a Mazda 5 minivan right now. So I think that's about as small as you can get and still call it a van.
Okay.
So yeah, I had previously my first van was an old Dodge Ram van. So think like creeper van. But
Oh, bigger.
it was bigger, yeah. But it still wasn't big enough to stand up in. It was like a low top. And then after that, I had a built out Ford Transit, which was very nice, and tall
Very
and
big. Yeah.
big, yeah. Which was great and I loved. And there's pluses and minuses to every style, every size when you're on the road.
Absolutely. What is your main form of income right now?
So this past year I was on book tour pretty much the whole year. All the time that I was traveling was for book tour. So my main income was selling books, hosting events, and I do also a little bit of freelance writing on the side. So I would say last year was probably 80% book related income and 20% writing for other companies.
And are you like touring the whole United States, continental US, or just staying local?
Yeah, so I'm home based out of Colorado, Denver area. So last year I went all the way to the East Coast. I did Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and then Missouri on the way back. And then I did Pacific Northwest. So I went Wyoming, Idaho, Washington, Oregon, California, and then back to Denver. And then I did a month in Arizona when I met you.
Oh yeah.
So
Okay, cool. Um, and then can you tell me a little bit about this Wonder Trail that you were on? I am not familiar with it. I'm not a hiker.
Okay, yeah. So the Wonderland Trail is in Washington, and I solo backpacked it in 2018 when I had very first moved into my first van. So I was up in Washington, just kind of tooling around in the van, and I crossed over a sign for the trail, and I thought, I've heard of that trail, and it's a 93-mile loop that circles around Mount Rainier. So it's all within the national park, and it's just under 100 miles.
Okay. How long did that take? A month?
11 days.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's pretty ambitious for hiking.
Yeah, it averaged out to like 8 or 9 miles a day.
Mhm.
Which when you're doing backpacking is not crazy.
Okay, that's true. But was it like ups and downs too, or was it pretty level?
Yeah. So actually, when I Googled the trail and I saw it was 93 miles, I had hiked a big section of the Appalachian Trail several years before, and I thought,
Mhm.
oh, 100 miles, that's no big deal. And then I got out there and was like, this trail is very hard. I had thought because it was a trail that circles around the mountain and doesn't summit anything, that it probably wouldn't be that hard. And it turns out because Mount Rainier is a glaciated peak and there are huge glacial rivers coming down the mountain in every direction. So when you're circling around it, you're basically going up onto the shoulder and then down to a glacial river and then up onto the shoulder and then down to a glacial river.
Oh,
Repeat 20 times.
oh my gosh. And it was enough to write a book about. So
Yes, trials and tribulations for sure.
so what is the main theme of your book?
The main theme is sort of the interplay of searching for independence in your 20s, and loneliness on the road or on the trail or in life. So how that search for independence, especially when you're at that age where you're like trying to break away from your parents, trying to break away from family expectations, can sort of put you in a really lonely place.
Yeah, absolutely. And working from home in itself can do that, and being a digital nomad, or however you identify as being on the road. How do you identify that?
I probably don't use the word digital nomad.
Yeah.
That feels loaded to me in I guess a funny way that I haven't thought much about.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I definitely consider myself like on the road most of the time. And it can be really lonely. And especially in the book, I start the story with, I was traveling around in my van and I was feeling very lonely. And then I thought I'd go to the trail because that was a place I had found community before. And I will say I have, over the years, better found my community on the road. And I have made enough friends who also live in vans and friends who live in the places that I travel to, that I'm not as painfully alone out there as I was in the beginning. But I think anytime you're starting something new, there's a tendency to feel a bit isolated until you get into the community with it.
So when you were on the Appalachian Trail, you felt like you did find a community. My brother-in-law, I think, hiked it. I don't know if he did the full thing or a big portion of it, but I feel like they started to travel in groups and things like that. Was that not an experience on the Wonderland Trail?
No. So yeah, the Appalachian Trail is a really, really special place. It is unlike any other long trail that I've done in that it is sort of set up for community. There are shelters all along the trail where you can stay, and people tend to congregate and camp at the shelters, whether you're staying in the shelter or in a tent. And so you kind of find yourself with a group of people, and you will find the people who are going the same speed as you, the people who are taking like long breaks in town. Like you you kind of find your people as you go. And if you are hiking with someone and you're like, you're not my people, like you will meet more people later that day, right? Like there's just so many people on that trail that it's impossible to truly isolate yourself. And the Wonderland Trail is very permitted, so there are assigned campsites, but a lot of the camping areas only have between 2 and 5 campsites. So those are going to be like the only 2 and 5 people you see that day.
Okay.
So it's definitely, and you're assigned, so you can't like meet someone and say, oh, I want to hang out with this person, we're going to camp together now, because you each have assigned spaces.
Like a reservation that you had to make ahead of time?
Yes. Yeah.
And it's full up, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Okay. You want to talk about your tour a little bit, what that was like for you?
Sure. Yeah. Interestingly, I was almost overwhelmed by the social interaction on my tour. The first leg of the tour was the East Coast out to Virginia and back. And the reason I went there is because there's a big Appalachian Trail Festival called Trail Days in Damascus, Virginia. And so I first signed up for that. And then I was like, okay, if I'm going to be in Virginia, where else can I do events? And I reached out to local gear shops, REIs, and like a few other bigger events. And I ended up booking something like 14 events in a 3.5 week period. And so I was doing back-to-back, days in a row of events. And some of the events are similar to what I was doing at TinyFest, where I was sort of standing at a table with my books. People were walking by and I was like, hey, let me tell you about my book, giving them the pitch and then selling books. And then I also gave a talk at TinyFest. So some of it was where I'm like speaking for 45 minutes and then taking questions. And some of it was I'm standing at a table and I'm just pitching the book over and over again. And both of those are very socially stressful experiences for an introvert, especially. Um, so it's
the
like
opposite of your trail experience, total opposite.
exactly. And it's wonderful to talk to people, and especially at an event like a trail days, because in the trail community, people read books like this all the time. And so there are people at trail days who knew who I was and they wanted to come talk to me because they had already
Oh,
read the book.
nice.
And like, that's a really wonderful experience. And it's so
Mhm.
lovely to have someone come up to you and say, I read your book. I loved it. Like, I really related, essentially like all the things I wrote the book for, getting that feedback.
Mhm.
So it was a very fulfilling experience, but I had definitely overbooked myself. And so, um, and additionally, I was traveling in the really small van. And so when I had people who reached out to me on social media, people I had met on the trail saying like, hey, I live in Virginia. Do you want to stay at my house? Do you want to crash with me when you're here? I pretty much said yes to any offers that I had been given. So
Mhm.
then at the end of a day of doing book sale events, I was going to someone's house who I either didn't know or didn't know very well.
All right.
And then and then having to socialize with that person. And
Uh-huh.
so, and of course I'm like, I'm so grateful to these people
Hot
for opening their
shower.
homes to me. Right. Showers, laundry, like a stove, and being in a home, which is nice. But then it was like, okay, now I have to hang out with this person and talk to them for a couple hours. And I was like, I just really want to go like lay down.
Yeah.
So I did find that I needed more rest between events, needed a little bit more downtime. And so when I scheduled my Pacific Northwest tour, I ended up with probably also about 13 to 14 events, but over a 2.5 month period instead of
Mhm.
about a month. So on that tour, I had, a couple events clustered together, and then I would have like 4 or 5 days off. And I went backpacking during that time.
Good for you.
So I was like, okay, like do work and then go explore and have fun and do the things that really fill me up in a different way.
Christine, I always like to try to get the backstory of why people end up working from home, or in your case, on the road. What led you to this lifestyle?
Before I wrote the book, I was working for Natural Grocers, which I know you guys have in Arizona too.
Yeah.
They're like a natural food grocery store chain. They're based in Colorado, based in Denver. So I had worked for them in Denver, and then I actually had moved to Sedona for a short period of time and worked at the store there. And retail's really hard, and I loved it in some ways. I'm very
Mhm.
passionate about health and about food, and like there are things that I really loved about the job. And then there is working retail.
Yeah.
And I was just exhausted by it. And I went on a trip to Australia where I road tripped up and down the east coast of Australia and went to the beach every single day and like spent time with a friend who was living there for a bit. And I came home from that trip and I was just like, I can't go back to work. Like it was just one of those, like I was dreading it so much going back to work that day. And I was like, okay, I had an exit plan at that point. I had already bought my first van and I was planning to work like through the end of that year to save up money and like go hit the road.
Mhm.
And it was April. And I walked into my job and I worked for about 4 hours and I went to my boss and I was just like, I can't stay here. Like I'm crawling out of my skin. And so I quit my job that day.
Mhm.
And I had this van that was it wasn't brand new. It was new to me. I had just bought it. And it was not built out. It had seats in the back. And I was just like, I guess I'm just moving into this van. So I built it out over the course of the next like week, pulled the seats out, put a floor down, built a bed. That was pretty much it.
Wow. I mean, did you
um,
already have a place that you were living at that time?
I was staying with a friend,
Mhm.
pretty much rent free because
Mhm.
I had only just moved to Sedona 4 months before. And so I
Uh-huh.
was like, I was very much in transition at the time.
Mhm.
But I felt like I can't just like stay here, not
Yeah.
working, not doing like, what would be the purpose of that?
Mhm.
And so, yeah, so I pretty quickly was like, okay, I'm going to move into this van with no plan and I don't know where I'm going and I don't know what I'm doing. Um, and that very soon became like a pitting feeling of aimlessness, right? Like I was
Mhm.
traveling around. I was like, I'm free as a bird. I can do whatever I want. And sometimes that is almost more difficult, like
Mhm.
that I don't like paradox of choice, like that you just can do anything, so you don't know what you're supposed to be doing.
Right.
Like you don't want to make the wrong decision, right? Because you have so
Mm-hmm.
much freedom. And it was about 4 months later that I hiked the Wonderland Trail.
Okay.
And while I was on the trail, I realized I want to write a book about this.
Mm-hmm.
And everything sort of just started happening at that point. I felt like I had purpose for the first time.
Mm-hmm. About how old were you at that time, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah. In April, when I was turned 28 in Australia while I was on that trip, and then
Okay,
came home and left my job. Yeah.
got it. Um, I don't know how to say this sensitively. Is that the right way to say it? Like I know that there's a lot of people that have chosen the lifestyle of living on the road. And I'm just curious, how do you identify, and I was trying to say that earlier, more in like a way that like I'm not homeless. Like this is my choice that I've made this decision to live on the road and to work and have this freedom to move.
Sure. I guess I use the term van life, which is like a very social
Mm-hmm.
media based term, but I think
Right.
that is definitely one that's associated with like I'm doing this because I love it.
On purpose. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
That makes
yeah.
sense. And I feel like now it's more socially acceptable. There's not the stigma because you're like, oh my goodness, that's so cool. You have the freedom to go versus like, what, you're not
Like you
settled
live in
down.
your car, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the more people that you've met, like obviously through things like the TinyFest, or I have friends who've, been able to travel through basically 48 states, more or less, with even small children, like road schooling, they call it, with their
Hmm.
kids. And I know that the community is growing and growing, and more, I think, in media, maybe because of things like Instagram and TikTok, displaying, like showing the cool beds and like the ways that people
Yeah,
have done it.
totally. I do think that the van life movement, which I'm like started on Instagram, has created an awareness of this choice of living this way
Mm-hmm.
that has made everyone's parents not freak out. So,
Right. Yeah. There's a
oh my
community
gosh.
here. We're not just a bunch of vagabonds.
Right. I'm not just being a hobo by choice. Like I'm doing a thing that is a thing people are doing.
Yeah. Are you in your van now, or are you in a home base?
No, I'm at my home base in Denver, which is my partner's place.
Okay, cool. And you're there a few months at a time, or do you kind of come and go?
Yeah, so last year I was here about half the year, and I was maybe 2 months at a time would be the max that I would be here.
Mhm.
This year, I got home in time for Christmas from Arizona, and then I'll be headed out at the beginning of February, so like 5 weeks.
When you went on that first adventure, those first 4 months before you went on the trail, were you already doing like freelance work? Is that something that you had started back when you were in Australia, or is that something you've come into more recently?
No, not at all. I had no income. Luckily I had some money saved. And
Hmm.
so, and then once I moved into the van, I had no rent expenses, nothing like that. Um, and yeah, that first year I was sort of like, well, I'm just living off savings and maybe I'll take on some random work if I find it. I actually worked a couple weekends at Renaissance festivals,
Oh yeah,
like selling swords my first year.
cool.
Just like a random my family used to do Renaissance fairs when I was a kid, and so I had a connection, and I was like, hey, like it would be cool to make a few $100 and
Hmm.
like do something for the weekend. So I did that my first year, but that was pretty much my only income the first year.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So how did you pay for gas?
I mean, I just had savings and
Savings.
was
Yep.
living off savings. Yeah. Which gets stressful. Like, for the first few months, it's like, whatever, I have, X dollars and that'll last a while. And then as it starts to dwindle,
Hmm.
my parents definitely raised me with a sense of financial responsibility, and
Yeah.
like they definitely imbued me with financial stress. Like that's a thing that
Uh-huh.
I got from my parents. Because we were not always, wealthy. Like we were pretty poor when I was growing up, and so they were stressed about money, and so
Yeah.
they one taught me really well how to take care of money, which I have so much appreciation for, and they also gave me a sense of like impending doom if money things aren't the way they should be. And so
Okay.
that is something I've definitely struggled with over the course of the years that I've lived on the road.
So then when did you come into doing the social media and the freelance writing?
Yeah, so I started actually during the first year, I thought I'm going to go be a hiking guide. And I went and got my wilderness first responder certification because I thought that's something I can do while I'm living on the road. I can travel and do it in different places. It's not a full-time job, so I'll be able to like work when I want to work, essentially. So I was sort of going down that path. I had taken the course. I had found a company in Arizona that I was gonna guide for. And I went and did the first trip with them in May of the second year, so 2019. Oh, is that right? Yeah, I think that's right. May of 2019. And then like I started doing freelance and stuff for them. So they're a really small company. They found out I was writing a book when I was like hosting the tour for them. And they were like, oh, do you want to write some stuff for our website? And I was like, sure, that sounds great. Like, this is perfectly aligned with what I want to do. So I started writing for them. I started running their social media, and then COVID happened.
Oh, yep. So no more tours.
So then, yeah, they had to cancel everything they had booked and lay me off because they were like, we can't, like, what are we going to pay you? And so then that was a bit of a restarting because I had gotten to where I was making like enough money to live on working for them. And so then I was like, okay, I guess I have to figure out what I'm going to do now.
Right.
But that was also close.
Skills.
Yeah. And it was great because I had, I have my own social media and I know how to write, but I had never really done that for a company before. And since they brought me on in the way that they did from guiding, they were very open to working with me about like giving feedback and what they wanted. And it wasn't like me selling services. It was like them saying, hey, do you want to try doing this?
Nice.
Yeah, which was a great way to get into that. And now I'm actually going into this coming up year. I'll be doing essentially the same thing, running social media, writing blogs for a company that builds out adventure vans.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
So people that you've met along the way or at these TinyFest type events?
Yeah, I actually met them at TinyFest the same weekend I met you.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Excellent. So you're hoping to do more book tours, or are you phasing that out and going into this other thing?
A little bit of both. I will still be doing some of the bigger book events that were really productive for me. Like I'll be going to TinyFest in San Diego in March. I will be going back to Trail Days in Virginia. But I will be doing less small events and a little bit less extensive travel so that I can be more based in Arizona, working with this other company. Okay. And the book is 2 years old. It'll actually be 2 years old in a couple of days. So yeah, birthday. So at a certain point as an author, like you kind of have to move on from promoting one book in order to like write another one in order to move your career forward. So I'm definitely ready for that phase. And most authors wouldn't still be promoting their first book 2 years later. The main reason that I spent all of 2022 on book tour is because I couldn't do live events in 2021. So
right, of course.
Yeah.
You know what? I still have like 2 or maybe 3 birthdays I feel like I need to catch up on. So like as far as like all the things that we missed out on in 2020, 2021, and even 2022, I think it's okay. You got to pass there, I think.
Yeah, there was a strange extension in the book world in terms of like how long it's appropriate to still be talking about your book. Yeah.
So is there another one on the horizon?
Yes, very much. I'm working on a second memoir, and I am also working on my first novel.
Oh, fun.
So we'll see which one wins. It's like, what do I feel like writing today?
I have a few friends help me out. It's the November challenge that people try to write their novel in like a month.
Yeah, NaNoWriMo. It's National Novel Writing Month.
I've never done it, but I have a few friends who've met their goals, which is incredible.
Nice. It's a big feat. I did it 2 years ago. And what I wrote is not going to be published, but it does exist.
It got the juices flowing. I want to hear how you've made your van life work for you. I don't always or very often, I don't want to use the digital nomad, but the people I haven't, other than Renee, I haven't interviewed very many people who are on the road full time or even half time. So what are some tools that you have found that have made this lifestyle easier for you?
I think one of the big things is learning where you can be during the day to be most productive. And so in the van I'm in currently, there's not room for me to sit in there and work. It's basically a bed and a pile of book tour stuff. And then like clothes, box of food. So everything's kind of like piled up.
And functional. Yeah.
Yes, it's like everything I need is in there, not really space for me to like hang out. So I have learned to go to coffee shops, to go to libraries, sometimes to go to parks if the weather is nice and like sit outside and write. And to be able to schedule my week around where I'm going to be and where I'm going to be able to work. So I think the biggest thing, is number one, learning where you're most productive. And I think that's true even when you're working at home. Because when I have an office at my partner's place and I can't get diddly done in here. And like, you can see that's my desk. It's completely piled up with paper. Like I'm not sitting at that desk ever. I'm taking this interview at the bedside table because this is where I sit at my computer. And so if I need to write or if I have specific things I need to get done, I will still go to the library from here, because that is a place where my brain switches into like, we're working now mode.
I can identify with this. Like
Yeah.
there's certain rooms and spaces and desks in my house where I'm like in the zone.
Yeah.
And there's others that like I do my interviews in here. I'm in a closet. But I do my best writing right now at the kitchen table. I'm trying to move I sometimes sit at my husband's fancy desk. But yeah, like I feel you. There's different seasons for productivity here or there, but there's the zone, it's like a mental I don't know, a flood of ideas that only happen right here.
Yeah. And it's like that mind switching gears where you're like, okay, when I'm at home, I'm doing, I do all the cooking and like, there's like house things that I do at home that I consider part of my like work as a human being. And then, and then if I need to get like work done, then I need to either be at a coffee shop or a library. And I can like answer emails at home, that's fine. But if I need to like do focused work, it's better to go elsewhere. So I just use the same rules when I'm on the road, that I do at home. And then the other main thing that really is, I guess, hard for me and that I have to struggle with, is a sense of routine, because I don't work Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. Especially when I'm on the road, because I'm doing events and I'm going backpacking and I'm hanging out with people who are hosting me, or I'm making new friends. And I do a lot of networking. I do a lot of like social connection. And those things can be really exhausting, but I also still have to do my work at the end of that. So sort of figuring out the schedule, looking at the week and going like, okay, here's the things I have scheduled and here's XYZ that I need to focus and sit down and work on. And how am I going to fit all that together?
I'm curious if you've ever pursued any of the like couch surfing or what do you call it? Like house sitting type of communities.
I do know people who do the house sitting thing. I have downloaded the app, but I've never done it. Part of the problem is like the short notice of my life.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to schedule something too far in advance, and definitely for the house sitting, like it's harder to find things that are very short notice. So, or for short enough periods of time. I could probably make it work if I really wanted to, but I just haven't.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that I'm like, once I got into it, I'm sure I'd be like, this is great. And like, why didn't I do this sooner? But the barrier to entry of like making it work the first few times, I just like haven't gotten there.
So let's go back to some other tools or strategies that have helped you adapt to this lifestyle.
Oh my gosh. One thing that I have recently said on a backpacking interview was that if you can hike long distance, you can live in a van. It's definitely not for everybody. It's super minimalist. And I think that if yeah, if you can adjust your brain to the minimalist experience, then living in a van can be really fun and it can be really fulfilling. You can get a lot out of the experience, but we are not socialized to be minimalist in our culture. And it can be a really hard adjustment. And I will say, having been in the van life community for 5 years now, I've seen a lot of people come and go. And I think for the average person who van life is not a great fit for, 6 months seems to be about the max that people can make it. So I think if you make it past the 6-month mark and you're not totally hating life, then like you could do this forever. And the tools are essentially just like, what is your minimum level of comfort? And I will say, like, in my first van and in the van I have now, I have no toilet. So that really like shapes what I do all day long, because it's like great if I'm at a coffee shop or a library, 'cause bathroom there. If I'm hanging out somewhere else, then I have to like stop what I'm doing, drive somewhere to go to the bathroom. Right. There's just things that you get used to that are, I would say, very uncomfortable for people who aren't in that world. So learning those things as well, and then learning like where you're going to sleep at night. And there are definitely apps that are really helpful within the community for finding campsites, finding places that allow people to stay. And then depending on what your budget is like, I try to sleep free as often as I can. But occasionally, if I'm either traveling cross country and I'm stressed out about getting somewhere on time, I might use Hip Camp, which is like Airbnb for, it's not really campsites because it's usually people's property. So it's Airbnb for like people who have farms or have a house with a big backyard where they're going to let people camp in their backyard or things like that. So, and a lot of times it's like, between $10 and $20 a night. So it's cheaper than a lot of campgrounds.
Airbnb has those options sometimes too.
Well, and yeah, Airbnb and Hip Camp both have more like glamping, like stay in this cute little A-frame or like these teepee things and things like that. So that's definitely more on the upper end price wise.
Got it.
But like in Tennessee, I just slept on some people's farm in my van because I was like, I just need a place to park.
A place that you were allowed to park.
Yes, where no one's going to bother me. Like, I know there's people here, they live in that house, like they know I'm here. They had a little like composting toilet set up. I think I paid $12 and I was like, this is totally worth it not to be driving around all night trying to find a place to stay.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Did you ever do like the boondocking Walmart parking lot stuff too?
I have slept in some Walmart parking lots. Yeah. It's not,
I have
it's not
too.
really my
like
favorite
just
thing to do.
Road trips.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely convenient in some places. It's also something where it's like a vibe check. Like you get there and you're like, does this feel safe? Are there other people sleeping here? And that definitely depends on where you are. I slept in a Walmart parking lot in New Hampshire several years ago that a friend recommended to me, and I got there and I was like a little sketched out. But he was like, oh, I used to live in that parking lot. He like stayed there for like months.
Oh wow.
I was like, okay, like if you are sure it's safe, then and it was fine. I wasn't bothered. I was just a little like concerned.
I'm curious what you keep in your backpack when you're hiking. Thru-hiking is a term I don't know.
So thru-hiking is hiking end to end on a long trail. It's, I guess, debated on about what distance the trail has to be considered a thru hike. I've heard 100 miles. Or I've heard you have to resupply 3 times for it to be considered a thru hike. These are arbitrary like suggestions that people have made about what makes a thru hike. But the key when hiking long distance is to carry as little as possible, because it's like going to slow you down and you're not going to have as good of a time if you're carrying a lot of gear. So my first thru hike was on the Appalachian Trail. Well, my first attempted thru hike. And I was carrying a pack that was about 45 pounds. Now my pack is closer to 30 pounds. So I've downsized a lot. And what you carry really depends on what trail you're doing and what the weather's going to be like also. So that's a factor. But my core kit is essentially my pack, my tent. I have a sleeping pad and a sleeping bag. I always carry a merino wool bag liner also. So I have like the sleeping bag and then essentially like a sheet for the inside of the bag. And then I carry as little clothes as possible at this point in my hiking career, even though that I don't like to be cold. So it's a balance between figuring out how to not be cold, but not carry a bunch of extra stuff.
Yeah.
But it's essentially like, whatever I'm wearing, tank top, shorts and pants, rain gear, a poncho. And now I use like a 99-cent plastic poncho from Walmart because it's so much smaller. Like they come in a little package that's like this big.
I have one in my car.
Yeah. They're great for just like have one in your purse, have one like if you're going on a day hike in case it rains. And I haven't had to use them very often. They're kind of not single use, but they do tear. So they don't last.
Wrap-ish.
They don't last forever. But you can get some uses out of one if you're careful about putting it away. But that, and then I have like a very basic first aid kit, and then I have a stove, and then like food, whatever food I'm carrying.
Is it a lot of like protein snack bars kind of stuff?
I definitely do a lot of bars. I usually eat ramen for dinner. I'm a very boring food hiker. Like I eat the same thing every day. I have some food restrictions, and so there are certain things that I know work for me, and I don't like mess with that. So I eat oatmeal, I eat protein shakes, I eat ramen, and then bars. And then I'm also a runner, so I've gotten into eating like goos and gels and stuff for running. And
I'm not a runner.
Okay.
I don't know those things.
Goos are literally packets of goo. It's like baby food texture, or it can be more like honey texture, and you basically like drink it and it's calorie dense. So I will use those on the trail also. And then gummies it's like gummy bears but disguised as running fuel. Okay. You could eat gummy bears, it's pretty much the same thing.
Got it. Vitamin packed, I'm assuming.
Mostly sugar.
Yeah.
It's just meant to fuel cardio activity. Yeah. So it doesn't really need to be super nutrient dense, just sugar.
Then do you have to haul water with you, or is that where you refuel or reload or whatever you said, resupply?
Yeah. Water, it depends on where you are. So if you're hiking in the desert, then you're carrying a ton of water. If you're hiking in the Pacific Northwest, there is water every 5 minutes. So I carry a water filter. And so you just collect water out of streams or murky puddles or whatever is available.
Right.
And you're just drinking water. And, when you're in the mountains and there's beautiful streams like Colorado, we found a lot of water on the Colorado Trail. So most of what you're drinking is not gross, like good quality. You look at it and you're like, I would drink water out of that. And when you're in the desert, sometimes you're drinking water out of a cow trough because that's the only water there is.
So you use your filter and you just say a little
always
prayer,
filter. Always filter. Yes. Yeah. So there's water filters that are really effective. They do a really good job. I have never gotten waterborne illness. But there are also like treatment drops that you can put in the water. You can treat it with bleach, like a very small amounts. So there's several different methods, and for sure on the Colorado Trail, which is notorious for, there's a whole section where you walk through cow pasture. And so there's just cow poop everywhere. And so when we were in that section, we filtered the water and treated it because I was like, I'm not messing with that. I don't want to get sick.
Absolutely. And then in your van, what are some of the things that, other than books, that you bring with you? You said there's a bed in there. How big is this bed?
It's 27 inches wide.
Okay.
So considerably smaller than a twin size bed. I am 5'10", 5'11", and the bed goes from the back door of the van, like the hatch door, to the back of the passenger seat, and it is exactly as long as I am. And so that's about half of the van widthwise, and then the full length. And yeah, I carry books and other bookstore stuff. I have like a table and things like that. And then I have one bin of clothes. The really nice thing about having a home base is that I can trade out my clothes and not carry the same thing in
each trip.
perpetuity.
Yes.
Yeah. So I can pack clothes kind of according to where I'm going. And also just in like, I just want to have a different shirt with me this time, that I'm going to wear for the next month. So I have that. I carry my backpacking gear with me always, in case I want to go do something.
But that doesn't take up very much space because you're
it doesn't take up very much space, you know, it's decent size, but there, yeah, I have that. And then I have one bin of food, and I have my camp stove with me, so I can eat essentially the same food I eat when I'm backpacking when I'm on the road. And then I carried a cooler for a short stretch. That didn't seem to work for me. It was so hot in Virginia when I was there, and the ice would melt in like 6 hours. And I was like, this is way too much of a hassle. It's not worth it. Yeah.
There was a gal at the TinyFest who I had seen her video, and I said a very super quick hello to her as well, who's working out of a car. And I cannot remember her name. We'll look it up. But she tented part of the time. So she camped. So I'm assuming, I mean, do you have a bigger tent, or do you just have your small hiking tent?
I only carry my backpacking tent, which is very tiny. But I would prefer if the van is there to sleep in the van than to sleep in the backpacking tent. But I do have that available if I wanted to sleep in it.
And then how often do you adjust your travel plans based on the weather?
Ooh, rarely when it comes to being in the van, but if I am planning to backpack and there's going to be bad weather, I will usually not do that. Right. I'm definitely a fair weather hiker. I would much prefer, you know, if you're doing something long, there's really no avoiding bad weather. But if you're only going out for 2 or 3 days, I don't feel like it's worth it to just be soaked for 2 or 3 days.
No. Some people that are interested in, you know, alternative lifestyle as far as working on the road or working from home or working, you know, however, you know, with freedom, they're like, well, I can work wherever I have an internet connection. So can you talk a little bit about your internet options?
Yeah, I don't have internet in my van. The Starlink has gotten really popular, and I know lots of people in vans who have that. And I think if I was going to be to the point where I was not going to be in cities enough and needed internet, that's definitely what I would do. But I do think it depends on what you're trying to accomplish, right? If you want to be on the road so you can be out in the middle of nowhere, then you're going to need something like Starlink. But if you're traveling like city to city, or at least in small towns, areas, or if you're going so you can be close to nature to do nature things on the weekends, then you could work in a town, and do like, you know, do coffee shops, do libraries. But it also depends on, are you like Zooming all day long? Right. If you're talking, if you're in meetings, you can't really like sit at a Starbucks all day, because that's kind of obnoxious.
Yeah.
But a lot of my work is silent, like I'm just sitting doing emails and writing. So if I do have Zoom calls when I'm on the road, I will reserve like a room in a library, and that has worked pretty well for me. So it's similar to the bathroom thing, right? Like you can do it without having that. You just have to know where you can access it. So same goes for internet.
How often do you find yourself using the hotspot on your phone?
Ooh, not terribly often. Maybe once or twice a week. My weeks are just so different. It's hard. Like there's been a few times where it's like, oh, I'm doing this every day. And then sometimes never. I
think that I was with Sprint, and they just got bought out by T-Mobile, and I feel like I was throttled, or I was cut off, or I had to pay more after like so much. And now with the new plan, I have more access to it. But I'm thinking like using hotspot once or twice a week is a lot, where you're like, that hardly at all. So it's just a different perspective too, right?
Yeah. Well, it depends. Like, I don't think I've ever used my hotspot to Zoom, and that probably doesn't work super great.
I mean, you can Zoom from a phone directly without having to hotspot.
Yeah. I guess I've done that only I run a writing group, And
Mhm.
so I have used Zoom from my phone to do writing group from like a campsite. But the quality of that is not as critical as like doing an interview or something.
Right. Yeah. It's a published video kind of thing.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's me just like talking to my writing friends.
Yeah. Is there money in that, or is that just like for your collaboration and community?
Um, yeah, I'm not making money running the writing group right now. So
Yeah.
I do
I
have
feel
groups saying you should be charging for this. And I'm
Mhm.
like, oh, you know.
Yeah, I do some voluntary hosting of things as well. So what does 2023 look like for you?
I am getting started working for that company that is building out adventure vans.
Mhm.
So I will be adventuring in vans.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
And
so
theirs as well, or just not?
yes, yeah. So I'll be borrowing theirs when they're doing like a rental fleet to rent out the vans on Go Camp, I think is the name of the app.
Mhm.
So so their vans will be available to rent, and then when the vans are not rented, I will be taking them out and doing video, doing photo content, and then like writing about what it's like to travel in a van.
Mhm. A different van every
A
time?
different van. Um, right now they only have one, so it's a brand new company. They just finished building their first one, and they're working on three more. So
Okay.
by spring there'll be four. So hopefully I'll get to rotate through and like use different ones.
And when you're not actually in their van, you're still writing and doing social media for them.
Yep. Yeah.
Are you open to more business if anyone's looking for someone to help with social media?
Potentially. I definitely try to stay in my lane, as they say, in terms of the content that I'm writing. So yeah, specifically if it's about the outdoors, if it's about hiking, running, living in a van, rock climbing, the things that I know and am passionate about, um, potentially, yeah, for sure. But I don't want to overextend myself, and I'm still
Mhm.
working on my own writing projects. So I'm pretty selective
That's fair.
about what I'm taking on. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I also have a chronic illness, and part of the reason that working from home is so great is that I get to manage my own like working hours, working
Mhm.
time. And so I sort of have a cap on I'm not trying to have a 40 hours a week job.
Yeah. What is a good fit for you as far as balance and time?
It really depends on what I have going on travel wise, because that takes time. But if I was,
Mhm.
if I'm at my home base or if I'm somewhere where I'm not traveling around a whole lot that week, I try to keep it around 30
Okay.
hours of work. Yeah. Because I also like on top, on top of working, I also hike a lot. I run a lot. I do a lot of physical stuff to stay in shape.
Mhm.
And because that is so closely related to my business, like I kind of count that as work time too. So if it's like 30 hours of sitting at a computer type of work, 10 hours of running, hiking, being outside.
Right. So your business is called Rugged Outdoors Woman.
Hmm.
And the umbrella covers the book and what else?
And also the freelance work that I do. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, let's chat a little bit about how people can find your book and how they can
Yeah.
find you. And then we'll finish up with advice for people who want to work from home for the first time. So, where can people find you and your
Um,
book?
so the best place to reach me if you want to chat or see what I'm doing is definitely Instagram. But I'm also on TikTok, and my handle is Rugged Outdoors Woman on both of those platforms.
Mhm.
And then I have a website. The website is called aloneinwonderland.com, which is the name of the book. And that is a great place to purchase the book. You can buy signed copies there, which you can't really get anywhere else, unless you come to an event. And it also has a list of events coming up that I'm doing. It has some other shorter form things that I've written, and also links to different podcast interviews that I've done. So that's sort of more like my writing content space is the website. And then just like seeing what I'm doing and talking to me directly is social media.
I know you're going to be in California in March for the TinyFest. Do you have any
Yes.
other upcoming events? You said you're going to Virginia at some point.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to be in Florida for the first 10 days of February, and I have a few events at the Tampa REI and Gainesville REI, and then a couple libraries in Florida, and then I'll be headed back to Arizona I think the first week of March, I have a couple library events in Arizona before I head to San Diego.
Okay.
Yep. And then I'll be back at Trail Days in May in
So
Virginia.
you've mentioned REIs and shops and libraries, but do you ever do bookstores?
Occasionally, bookstores are pretty choosy when it comes to events. And because my book is self-published, a lot of them just aren't going to do events for self-published authors. Additionally, bookstores usually like to promote books that are less than 6 months old. So that window has closed for me.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's fair.
It's rough out there, but I honestly, I've done a couple bookstores and I've had great experiences with the ones I have done. But I really love the gear shop environment, and truly that's where most of my audience is anyway.
Right.
So I like being able to give presentations specifically about backpacking, about being a woman in the outdoors. And I think that I'm able to reach my audience most directly through gear shops.
What was the talk that you gave at TinyFest?
I actually have a specific talk that I only give at TinyFest. That's about loneliness on the road.
That's a really big thing. I mean, like there's loneliness from working from home too. Like even the people that aren't on the road still can experience it. So I think it's a theme that can really touch a lot of people.
Absolutely. Culturally we're so individualistic, and I think that's a factor. But then also with COVID and just this like tendency to isolate, a lot of us haven't really gotten out of.
I am going to ask you to just go ahead, and what's the advice that you would give for someone who's thinking about working from home for the first time?
I guess there's two different categories, right? There's working from home and there's working for yourself. And those are different things.
If you have something for each of them, that's fine.
I do think finding the space that you're most productive is really important. And I think also being open to the idea that working from home doesn't work for everyone. So going into it with an open mind of like, I'm going to see if this works for me. I think we've really glorified working from home, especially since COVID started. And for a lot of people, it's amazing. And it gives you the ability to balance your life and to like have time to do your chores at home. Like there's so many nice things about being at home during the day. And having a little bit more freedom and flexibility, but it doesn't work for everybody. And if you have like a hard time focusing without someone there holding you accountable, that's definitely something I have struggled with over time. Is actually doing work, especially working for myself, right? It's not just that I don't have someone physically there holding me accountable, but I don't have anyone holding me accountable at all. So I think learning those skills and or finding a mentor or a buddy to work with during the day can be super helpful. So I have some friends from my writing group who like sometimes we'll just Zoom for 3 or 4 hours during the day and like, okay, I'm working on X, you're working on Y, we're on mute, we're just doing the thing, and we'll check in 40 minutes or whatever.
Yeah, I do the same thing with there's a website you can get 3 hours, I think, for free every week. It's called Focusmate. And I've actually
just heard about this.
Yeah, Focusmate is my go-to if I'm working an all-nighter or overnight. I worked third shift for many years. So kind of like working from home or working from the road, working overnight is its own thing that some people can make the cut and some people won't. So yeah, if I'm working in the middle of the night, I am basically connecting with people in other countries to, stay accountable. It's cool.
Yeah, someone just told me about that and I've been thinking about trying it.
And anything specific for people who are considering van life?
Rent a van and try it out.
Okay.
Yeah, so many people buy a van, they build out a van. It's a 5-month project. They do all this work, they get ready to go, they get on the road and they realize I hate this.
Okay.
And I think that can just be avoided really easily by renting, and there's several companies now that host van rentals. They do like Airbnb essentially for vans. And so you can get one for a week, 2 weeks, a month, try it out, see if it works for you. And I think you usually know pretty quickly.
The company that you're working with is called one more time.
So the company is N2 Exploration. That's actually building and renting out the vans, but they are renting them on the platform Go Camp.
Go Camp.
And okay. Go Camp is popular. There's also one called
Outdoorsy. Yeah.
Yeah, those are the two that I'm sure there's probably other places you can rent vans, but those ones are generally people who live in vans renting out their vans.
Mhm.
So you'll be in one that was designed to be lived in, which I also think is kind of key. If you rent like a camper van from like, oh my gosh, what's that company called? Explore. They rent out camper vans for people to like go to the national park for the weekend, and they're just built differently.
Okay. I think that Outdoorsy has both. They have like the RVs and probably the vans.
Yeah, that sounds right. But yeah, getting one from somebody who's like, this is a van I live in and it was built with that in mind. Just the way that things are laid out tends to be different.
So try it out before you buy.
Try before you buy for van life, for sure. Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Christine. Any final thoughts before we say bye?
No, this has been great. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's April Malone with Christine Reed. And yes, I work from home, and we will see you next time. Thank you.